he came to the center of a large town. Yeah, so that section there. So this practice of equal taste is referring to at a particular point in your progress, often directed by the teacher, and of course, in this case, Milarepa's personal teacher, Marpa, is no longer in the picture, as in he has passed. So it's not this here, but often at the teacher's direction, a student might be told that now is time for you to formally practice this state of being called equal taste. What that is referring to in this specific context is a time where you are to test and see how you respond to situations, and sometimes even situations that you might deliberately provoke, deliberately provoke, to see your habitual response to things where they are. Yeah, so equal taste here is referring to that. Can you respond to everything that arises, pleasant, unpleasant, expected, unexpected, welcome, unwelcome, with equal taste? Equal taste here, and alongside this, generally you could say an equanimous mind, equanimity. Equanimity here, there are many types of equanimity. There are equanimity that doesn't involve insight or wisdom. And that kind of equanimity is basically downness, or numbing down, right? Numbing our emotions, numbing our focus, numbing our attention, so that everything is kind of fuzzy. That's one kind of equal taste. Here, equal taste is the taste of liberation, the taste of being free. So in this equal taste of liberation, obviously, presence of mind, understanding, clarity is present. So this is not, like practicing equal taste as in numbing our perceptions and our reactions so that they become flat, but rather in testing out where you are in your progress, and by provoking situations, to see whether you remain liberated, you remain free. So here when it says, another time when Milarepa went begging for alms in the practice of equal taste, it's a particular exercise that he's engaging in. Yeah. The rest of this section, this song, doesn't talk much about this practice of equal taste, but I thought that I should point out that this is not just some poetic or random detail that is thrown in there, but it's part of a yogi's, a practitioner's progress along the path. So anyway, he came upon this large town where many people were working on a house. So long story short, he appeared to be lazy. So there's lots of people very busy doing hard work, and he just sat there. So a donor, a benefactor, saw him and could recognize that he's a religious person, and so she said, "Here, you help me patch this, Yeah, you help me patch this bag here, right? And I will go get some food for you. So then when she came back, he had not done, you know, what she asked him to do, and so she got upset. So this is part of that equal taste, because normal expectations would be you need food. You come to a place, you see that everyone is working really hard, so you want to at least be on their good side, if not to ingratiate them, and you want to look helpful. So normal course of action would be to get busy, even if it is just to get a free lunch. So here Milarepa deliberately did not do anything. So he wants to see if he can take the expected censure and rebuke and possibly no food that is going to happen. Yeah, so that's the subtle point here. So of course the expected response came. This woman said, when they say that, you know, these kinds of you wandering yogis should be kicked out, they are really right. Here you have nothing to do, and you couldn't even put on one patch. How shameful. So, in response, he further kind of provoked that situation and went over to where those workers were and said, "Hey, can I have food?" You know, of course, this woman got even more upset. Who doesn't help when there is work, but only is available when eating starts. So further yelled at him. And so she said, you know, why are you so lazy? So then Milarepa took this opportunity to give a teaching. And so that takes us to 562. That's the beginning of that teaching there. I prostrate to the Guru Lords, in particular to the one who is so kind, protect me, I pray. And so then he prays to his teacher, Marpa. When people like you look at me, I seem to be free. But when I look, I seem to be busy. In the field that is birthless and free of extremes, I build the castle of meditative concentration. Therefore, I am not free to build an earthen castle. So this castle has the connotation of safety and immovability, impenetrable. And so what needs to be impenetrable in terms of the qualities that we train and build up? It has to be meditative concentration. This meditative concentration, we tend to think of it as, maybe because of the words, the wording, or also some ideas, funny ideas that we've picked up along the way. This meditative concentration, we think of it as a very intense but narrow state of mind, which is you have to, some people even kind of brag about this, you know, like I hear this all the time, you know, people say to me, not so much themselves, you know, they say, oh, I have a friend who said, you know, when he meditates, he can't hear anything at all. And often, more than once, I have people telling me, oh, I have a friend who says when they meditate, they can't hear anything at all. And I was so impressed by that. So I said, why are you impressed by that? Like every night, I think you do that. You go to sleep and you can't hear anything at all. You don't need to, you know, learn meditation to not hear anything at all. You don't need to learn meditation to not see anything at all. not taste anything at all, not feel anything at all. But somehow, that idea is floating around out there. And perhaps there are even meditation traditions that see that as a goal, but this is definitely not a goal in the Buddhist context, or in the context of Milarepa. So meditative concentration is not talking about this state of mind or state of being where your sense faculties are not working. It's talking about not being moved by circumstances. A certain weight exists. A certain weight that is in equal, I would say, proportions, understanding. There's artificial weight that we can add to being unmoving, and that often involves forcefully, limiting our sense engagements. That's an inferior kind of weight. The weight that comes from understanding, the weight that comes from clear seeing, so that then you're not moved by the 8 worldly concerns, the 8 worldly dharmas. It's called the 8 worldly dharmas. The 8 worldly dharmas are divided into 2 columns. Some of you have heard this before, but until you have memorized the 8, I'm not giving up repeating what they are. The 8 worldly dharmas fall under 2 columns, the want column and the don't want column. What we want is pleasure, what we want is gain, what we want is praise, and what we want is fame. So we chase after these 4. What we don't want is pain, what we don't want is loss, what we don't want is criticism, what we don't want is infamy. And so we do everything to run away from these 4. So these 2 columns are the push and the pull factors of confused existence. They arise from the 3 poisons. Confusion as the basic poison that then gives rise to attachment and aversion. Then the 8 worldly dharmas come into play. When the 8 worldly dharmas, these 8 winds are blowing, then chances are we engage in the 10 non-virtues of body, speech, and mind. So meditative concentration, this castle that he's building, comes not so much even from learning tricks, learning techniques to control the mind. So often we say, oh, you should count your breath, or you should only count your out breath, you should only count your in breath, or you should meditate on the Buddha image, or you should meditate on the Hung syllable, or you should, do this and you should do that. Yes, of course. In fact, the Buddha and his successors has discovered that depending on circumstance, depending on our temperament, our karmic connection, one or another object to anchor the mind can be more effective than another at a different time. For sure, there are all these methods, there are all these techniques, but we have to really understand that these methods and techniques are secondary. What is primary is really developing the resolve. And the resolve has to come from, again, understanding. The resolve to not be moved. The resolve to not want to run around out there, the resolve to be content, to be in here, in this house, in this body, content, to not chased, to not be dragged around. So that's the castle, He says, I'm busy building this castle, this castle of meditative concentration. And where is he building it? He's building it in this field, in this plot of land, in this field that is birthless and free of extremes. Free of extremes, so many ways to unpack this, so many ways to talk about this. But I think most relevant to this instruction here is, as you develop this resolve that I'm not going to move, I'm going to abide in this samadhi, which is what meditative concentration translates. I want to abide in this samadhi. I'm not going to move. I'm going to remain in this samadhi. Where we build this samadhi, we need to understand, is on this field, in this space where it is fundamentally free of extremes. What are extremes, right? Extremes is and is not. Like, don't like. On the level of experience, you and I both still have like, don't like. Acceptable, not acceptable. Welcome, unwelcome. We still have these extremes. But here Milarepa is saying, actually, the natural state is free of these extremes. So then you say, well, then what is it that I'm experiencing? All my pains, all my sufferings, and all my happiness. What is it? What are these? These are illusorily arising. They are fundamentally birthless. They have no basis. They have no basis because, by definition, confusion has no basis. Confusion is that which temporarily exists, temporarily arising. So the 37 Bodhisattva practices, it says, all happiness that we experience is like rainbow in the sky. It's like rainbow in the sky, clear and vivid. It's not saying that the rainbow doesn't exist, but it doesn't exist in the solid way that we relate to our happinesses. And all the sufferings in the world is like a dream. All the sufferings in the world is like a dream. So this dream-like quality, this rainbow-like quality, the more we understand that, then the more we are closer to the reality of things as being birthless and free of extremes, and the easier it is to build this castle, this indomitable castle. And so he says, therefore I don't have time, to be building any physical castles. On the northern plane of Dharmata's emptiness, I tame the rough earth of the afflictions. Therefore, I'm not free to plow my father's field. In any case, his father's field was robbed from him by his relatives. It says, but on this northern plane of Dharmata's emptiness, Dharmata is reality as it is. reality as it is there. So that's the context. So in that context, even though this rough earth of the afflictions, on the level of you and me, where we still experience these things, they are rough. They are the afflictions. But their nature is dharmata's emptiness. So we might be tempted to say, well, in that case, why do we need to plow this rough terrain that is not real? In order, I would say, in order for us to be thoroughly convinced that in fact it's the dharmata's emptiness only. Right now, intellectually, we might say, oh yes, it's dharmata's emptiness, all these afflictions, but we still get afflicted. We still have our, likes and dislikes, welcome and unwelcome. We still have that. So as long as we have that, then it's necessary to plow. At the border of ineffable non-duality. So each of these so far, the first line touches, kind of briefly touches, points to the ultimate side of this coin. The second line points to the relative experience side of the same coin. So here, in the border of ineffable non-duality, I tame the enemy, the demon of clinging to an I. Therefore, I'm not free to tame hostile enemies. Therefore, external enemies, building earthen castle, plowing the field, power over external enemies. These are things that I don't have time for. And so I tame the enemy, the demon of clinging to an I. The problem with clinging to an I, quote unquote I, the quote unquote I there is, if we unpack that, it's sometimes what's called the impossible I. What is the impossible I? It's the I that we habitually cling to as me. That I, it is impossible to exist the way we think it exists. There is possible I's. What's the possible I? It will be things like, oh, I'm just going to go to the store and pick up some milk. In that statement, I'm going to go pick up I'm going to, go to the store and pick up some milk. That's a possible I, no problem. Buddha has no fight with that. You can go about, for convenience sake, say I, and even believe in that I. Believe in that I enough to get out of the house, lock the door, get in the car, drive over to the store, right? Now, along the way, while driving over to the store, some rude driver cuts you off. In that moment, that I that turns up, that's the impossible I. Impossible not on the relative level, because on the relative level, definitely is very possible. But that's the exaggerated I. As for that exaggerated I, it doesn't really exist, but it feels very strongly existing and rarely firmly existing. and very stable, very definitely existing, not at all illusory. But that's the impossible I. So tame this enemy, clinging. So clinging, in fact, is where the problem is. It's not the I. The I that go to the I that you assert when you say, I'm going to go to the store and get some milk. That I is no problem. It's what clinging does to that I. That's what Milarepa says. He is taming the clinging. To the palace of non-dual mind itself, I invite the bride of Dharma practice. Therefore, I'm not free to take an ordinary wife. So this Dharma practice as something deeply personal, intimate in that sense, like taking a bride. But this bride, right, fundamentally is never something else, a non-dual mind itself. So Dharma practice, at first, it looks like it's something else. It's something that we do, something that we have to learn, something that we have to set an alarm for, Oh, my daily meditation, time to start. You tell Alexa to remind you. Then you forget, what her name is, and then it keeps, the alarm keeps going on and on. You can't get it to stop, I just realized that I just used her name in vain, and it's lighting up now, trying to figure out what to do with me. I think it's spying on me. I should say a random list of things. I'm sure it'll turn up in my Facebook asking me if I want to buy them. Anyway. So this Dharma practice, right? It seems like, like it's a means to something else. So then in that sense, it seems like there's me and there's the bride. Yeah. But actually, it's not two things. In fact, what we're practicing when we say we practice the Dharma is simply not that it's simple. It's merely training ourselves to be or to behave in a way that more accurately matches the way things are rather than the way they appear to be. So I said to, the other day I said, when we pray, like, oh, may they practice the Dharma, we don't mean, may they become Buddhist. And when we say, may the Dharma flourish, we're not saying, oh, may there be more prayer wheels, may there be more meditation centers, Yeah, maybe it's good, but more fundamentally what we are saying, when we say may the Dharma flourish or may they practice the Dharma, we are saying, may we live our lives in a way that is more in tune with the reality of how things are, rather than appearance of how things are. That's what we're praying. That's what we're wishing for. We're not wishing for there to be more converts to Buddhism. We're not wishing for more people to turn Dharma wheel, walk around like that. That may or may not be Dharma practice. The more essence level of Dharma practice is to live our lives in accordance with the truth of things. So Dharma practice initially seems like it's a discipline that we're imposing on ourselves, right, in order to arrive at some result that we want, that we covet right now. But at some point in our process of practicing the Dharma, we have to understand on a deeper level that actually we're manifesting, what we're trying to embody, we're trying to live more in accordance with the truth of how things are, rather than with our fantasies, rather than with our hopes and fears. In my own body, the mandala of the victorious ones, I care for the small child of awareness. Therefore, I'm not free to care for a snot-nosed child. In another Milarepa story, there's another time he wandered into a village and was begging for food, and this woman was very busy, and I think the woman had a goat and a child, and then she said, I'll go get some food for you, but you keep an eye on this goat and this child. And then when she came back, both the goat and the child was not there. She asked Milarepa, where is the goat and where is my child? And Milarepa said, well, I don't know. So, on the relative level, if you're going to leave your goat and a child with someone, you need to have some discernment. Okay, don't leave it to like even Milarepa. Take home lesson, pay your babysitter well. Don't don't ask a yogi to keep an eye on your belongings and your dependents. Anyway, he says, the child of awareness, within this body, that's what I attend to. In the all-joyous courtyard of my upper torso, I amass wealth of hearing and contemplating. Therefore, I'm not free to amass material wealth. Some of this is references to Vajrayana vocabulary, mandala of the victorious one, which is this body is said to be the mandala, the palace of the Buddhists. In the all joyous courtyard of my upper torso, the upper part of the body, there I listen. Hearing is talking about listening to the teachings. Today we will include reading. We're all literate, so aside from listening to the teachings, we also read, right? So that's the learning part. Then to contemplate, to think through what we're hearing. And therefore I'm not free to amass material wealth. On the mountain of unchanging Dharmakaya, I look after the wild horse of self-awareness. Therefore I'm not free to look after cattle and sheep. So this self-awareness right now is behaving like a wild horse. This self-awareness here is not talking about Rigpa. For those of you who know that term, it's talking more, without seeing the Tibetan in this context, is talking about. From this context, you can know that it's not talking about Rigpa. Rigpa, the natural wakefulness, is not a wild horse. Here is more talking about, simply your mind right now, this monkey mind. This monkey mind is jumping around. This wild horse is running around. But understand that no matter how wild it runs around, no matter how crazy this monkey, it is only running around in this mountain of the unchanging Dharmakaya. Just to simply know that, already gives us some space, already pacifies some of the oppressiveness of dukkha, of suffering. Out of the mud of flesh and bones, I built the stupa of spontaneous presence. Therefore, I'm not free to make any tata walls. Up until now, those are ordinary things that people have to tend to for their daily lives. Then, starting from here, it's more like more specifically kind of religious and spiritual practices that one might do. So he says, even that, I have no time to make these like clay images of deities. People do that as a way of accumulating merit, and in some traditions as a form of ngondro, to make 100,000 tatas. So he says, but instead of this mud, to make these clay statues, I use this mud of flesh and bones in order to create the tata of spontaneous presence. So this spontaneous presence here pertains to Rigpa, this innate wakefulness. So I build. Of course, here, not literally. Rigpa is not something you literally have to build. More so, it's what you have to discover. The underneath, so to say, are always present together with the confusion, with the elusive confusion, is the innate wakefulness. So sometimes you come across this expression, co-emergent, which is thoughts and confusion arises, co-arises with this innate wakefulness. In the center of my heart, a three-sided vessel, I hoist up the oil lamp of luminosity. Therefore, I'm not free to make offerings for oracle trances. So I say, I have no time, to make offerings to these. So oracle trances here is talking about, like in Tibetan culture and many cultures, if you try to divine what is in store for you, what would be the outcome of this undertaking, you go consult basically fortune tellers. He says, I don't have time for that because I'm doing something more meaningful, which is the lamp of luminosity. Spontaneous presence, the one before, is the emptiness aspect of the mind. Luminosity is the knowing aspect of the mind. So this knowing aspect of the mind, this luminosity, when it's fully uncovered, fully discovered, it's the Buddha wisdom. It's the five Buddha wisdoms. In the shrine room of bliss and emptiness, inseparable at the tanka of the mind is equipoise, even mind, evenness. And this is the samadhi that I was talking about earlier. I make the offering of the unchanging feast. Therefore, I'm not free. I don't have time to make material offerings. On the paper of the completely pure mind itself, I write the letters of non-attachment. Therefore, I'm not free to take down any notes. No need to take any notes, because the main point is let go, I write the letters of non-attachment. Into the skull cup of emptiness, I pour the poisons in sets of 3 and 5. Therefore, I'm not free. I don't have time for black magic rites. Of course, he was someone who earlier in his life, learned these magical skills. Jedi mind tricks. One of his disciples, Rechungpa, also, when he went to India, also picked up some of these Jedi mind tricks. So here when it says black magic rites, I think translating that into English, instantly you say, oh, how can you? Of course he doesn't do that. But in the Tibetan context, it doesn't have that immediate negative connotation. It simply means, useful tricks. You can do useful tricks to intimidate people, to help people. You can also use these tricks, to turn people to the Dharma. It's possible. But here, Milarepa says, I don't have time for this. So instead, he says, I offer the 3 poisons, already mentioned, right? Confusion, attachment, and aversion. Those are the 3 cups. And he says, then also the 5 cups will be these 3, plus pride and jealousy. Offer it where? Offer it into the skull cup. Pour it into where? Pour it into the skull cup of emptiness. Meaning, realization of emptiness purifies. Purifies means do away with. You do away with the poisons. At the threshold where love's anguish meets my mind, I care for my kin, the 6 realms beings. Therefore, I'm not free to care for my own family. And so he's talking about practicing unbiased goodwill and love for all beings, instead of investing in biased. Of course, all of us, where we are mostly investing in biased caring and loving. Milarepa says we should train to move in the direction of caring for the beings of the 6 realms. The key instructions I receive from the Father Gurus, I carry that load into my mind stream. Therefore, I'm not free to do ordinary activity. In the solitary mountain retreats, I practice toward the essence, which is awakening, which is enlightenment. Therefore, I'm not free to fall into the sleep of ignorance. With my mouth, the opening of the 3-sided conch, I sing out this melody of the key instructions. Therefore, I'm not free to idly chatter. I don't know this reference, a 3-sided conch. But with my mouth, I sing out these instructions. I don't have time for idle talk. Questions or comments? Reflections to share.
This is one of those things where this far into the book, I don't know. I guess these are maybe not necessarily on the. Anyway, he doesn't really need to practice these things, does he? I
Hmm?
mean, he
Say
doesn't
that
really
again.
need to practice these things. He's actually giving it opportunity to teach. I mean, it's not related to the content, but more like
Oh, I
more
think
like
he continues to practice. Um, he continues to practice this.
yeah,
Yeah. Uh, all till the end, you know. Uh, of course, you know, you could ask, you know, is he practicing because he still needs to get there, or is he practicing because precisely because he's there and naturally this is what awakened beings do.
right, right.
So we you know, one way of thinking about these practices is, and I think especially in those the ways of there is some, you know, traditions, and I don't mean like lineages, but individuals who relate to like these the path, the practices as like means to an end. So obviously, you know, like we hear things like, you know, finger pointing to the moon, or something like, you know, all aspects of the path from the perspective of the result are still afflicted. That you need to in the end also, you know, burn up, you know, the path, yada yada yada, things like that, you know. So that's a very in my kind of way of understanding that I appreciate what they're saying, which is warning against, right, become fixated on the methods, become fixated on the path, and yeah, and create, you know, subtle but nonetheless attachments, right? But if we go too far with that kind of thinking, then we might relate to practice as a means to an end. So we might think, oh, the four immeasurables, love, compassion, joy, equanimity, oh, they are the path, they are not the result, right? Then we think, oh, we should cultivate these things so that we can get somewhere else. But another way of understanding the relationship is these four, they are not they are not just, or they're not even, or they should not be seen as things that you need to get to somewhere. But that when you get somewhere, that somewhere you get to, these four are exactly there, right? So that what you're doing now, like I said earlier, is simply aligning yourself more, uh, more and more in alignment with the natural state, the way things are. So the four immeasurable minds are not a means to an end. The more four immeasurable minds are the very content of the awakened state. So with regards to like, what about Milarepa when he's singing about this? Is he still practicing these things? I think my answer would be yes. You know, because not only are these ways to get to the Buddha state, but when you arrive at the Buddha state, this is what you naturally do.
Right, right. Just the expression of himself. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's one other thing earlier on. You talked about the senses
Mm-hmm.
and meditation, and I actually saw an article. I don't know if it was in Tricycle or whatever, but a translator who really was making the position that the Heart Sutra was talking about no, when they say no ears, no mind, no taste, no touch, they're talking about that's what you're establishing in the state of meditative absorption is that you actually are cutting out you don't get those senses.
Oh yeah.
And it's like, it sounded nutty to me, but you just brought that up, like
Yeah.
not seeing. It's like, that's a thing. going
Oh
on?
yeah.
I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
it sounded like those early ascetic practices that the Buddha encountered. There's just,
Yes.
intensity things so that he would emerge after a month and going, well, everything's the same now.
Yes, exactly.
So, but I
Oh
just
yeah.
just out of gossip or something, it's like, what is that about?
Right. I mean, just to point out, there's a lot of things out there,
Yeah,
that, even, tricycle or whatever,
yeah,
right? Or Lions Roar, and it doesn't matter who, but that is a view shared by some. Now, of course, when I say I don't think that's the way, so I'm making a position. I'm taking a position. Yeah? So you need to investigate. Like like, is this what the Buddha is teaching?
right.
As the goal,
It seems like with almost everything else besides being mindful, that we can learn to do it mindlessly. We can drive, we can write, we can talk without thinking about it. But being present it requires always some effort to be here. It just because it can go away so quickly without it even noticing otherwise.
it's what we have habituated. Yeah, so we have habituated being distracted. So then it takes effort to be undistracted. Then when the scales start to tip, when we become more and more habituated to being undistracted, and then things will begin to tip the other way. Then you can say, and somewhere Milarepa sings this way, he says, even in the state of distraction, I'm not distracted. And the Lojong teachings also talk about that. You know, even when distracted, my practice remains. That's when the scales are tipping the other direction, and it's like, yes, I'm crossed that threshold. But for sure, right now, it seems like, this undistracted presence takes so much effort. That's because of, in relation to what we have mostly habituated up till this point. Luckily, what we have mostly habituated have no basis, as in they are mistakes. Mistakes, have mistakes mean they don't line up with reality. And that which doesn't line up with reality doesn't take as much effort to dismantle.
Bring it on.
Hmm?
I said, bring it on.
Oh,
Make it
yeah.
easy. Make it easy to dismantle. And another thing, when I've really gotten that feeling, oh my gosh, I've got it. And then it keeps slipping away. It's like, wait, stay, stay, stay. Let's have a party, celebrate. And
Yeah,
then,
it doesn't
whoop,
like it when we grasp.
yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, I know what I have experience.
It doesn't like it when we grasp.
Yeah,
And so the next level would be to work on not grasping when it arises. Yeah. When it arises, it's good. Then next step is when the next time it arises, don't grasp and see what happens.
very, very good. Yes. Thank
Not to
you.
have too much expectations, plans, ideals, you know, and don't be
Yeah,
so
I
hard
know
on
it. I know it up here.
don't be so hard on ourselves, you know. Yes.
Uh, this idea of reality that you mentioned, I think, is an interesting term, and I've had some difficulty with it. The reality that you referred to maybe 3 or 4 minutes ago, am I understanding that correctly as being the reality of emptiness?
Mm, you might have to say a little bit more by what you mean by reality of emptiness.
Well, I'm kind of approaching it in a
Like commit.
pedagogical sense.
Say more.
Excuse me?
Say more.
Okay. If I mention this idea of illusion or um, alluding to error and reality, I find a lot of pushback in that area with people. So I've softened that to
Oh yeah, don't
suggest
worry about
that,
other people. Don't communicate. Don't try to communicate it to other people. Yourself. Tell me, what is this reality of emptiness?
the reality of emptiness
Uh
would
huh.
be some type of, I guess, ultimate reality or deep reality that would be different than what we normally think of as real.
And what would that look like?
It would look like,
Or feel like, or we have some hint. Okay, we're in the right territory now because there are some signs.
I think ultimately it's a place where, I think ultimately it's a place or a mindset where there's an innate joy and peace and comfort
That comes from what?
from that state of mind,
Which is
which is just kind of existing in this sense of this, well, we'll just call it a reality or ultimate reality. If you don't want to contrast it with what we normally deal with. You were using the terminology of what we're comfortable with. I forgot the exact words you were
yeah,
using.
right. So here something I think uh, when the eight worldly dharmas are not in control of us, that is when we know we are living more closely to this reality. Whether we call it ultimate, whether we call it emptiness, whether we call it dharmakaya, whether we call it, Milarepa has a lot of different terms for it. Non-dual mind, ineffable non-duality, dharmatas, emptiness, free of extremes, birthless, all of that. They're just like one fancy word replacing another fancy word. So I think, like you said, pushback from people, and I think people are also like, it's just one fancy word replacing another fancy word. And then with ourselves also, sometimes we have one fancy word replacing another fancy word, and then they are, then when you, it's like sometimes when I learn a foreign language, you look for one word and you go look for the definition. The definition takes you to another word, and you're like, wait, I don't know this other word. Then you go look at the other word, then it points you back to that first word, right? So sometimes learning Buddhism can feel like that. Then unfortunately what happens, I think, for most of us is like when we're in the club long enough, we just agree to, pretend that this word refers to that word refers back to this word, and we'll just nod to each other knowingly. And you're like, yes, I'm in the club. But am I closer to understanding what the Buddha is teaching? That's a different matter, often. And so, as they say, like after years and years of therapy, you have become a good patient. Uh, you figure out, how to become a patient that gets stars for all the years. So here, something, all those big words, we can bring it back to those 8 worldly dharmas. How much power they have over me. That's it. So
Well,
I've
that's
met
simple.
people, with no religious or spiritual training, who don't seem to be so under the clutches of the 8 worldly concerns, the 8 worldly dharmas. And I'm like, oh yeah, these are true dharma practitioners. I've met Christians who believe in the saving power of Jesus. And then I could feel, like the 8 worldly dharmas, they're not wrapped up in that. I'm like, oh, these are real dharma practitioners. That's the dharma that we're talking about. So joy may or may not be present. Bliss may or may not be present. Hard to say, and it's hard to gauge sometimes, right? It's like, I don't know, like, did I get more joy from eating my favorite, donut from Asheville?
Chocolate raspberry cake.
Oh yeah, and chocolate raspberry cake torma yesterday. Like is that joy? Like how is it qualitatively different from, like the spiritual joy, high joy? Slippery, hard to tell. But not under the power of the 8 worldly dharmas. Very clear. No need to be suspicious.
Well, what do you think about this term delusion?
Hmm?
What do you think about this term delusion?
To update illusion, just say movie.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
So exactly like that. Some movies are more convincing than others. They all can evoke experiences, joys and fears, hopes and, you know, desperation. All kinds of emotional responses arise. But what we experience, what prompted those experiences, those emotional responses, what prompted them, it's a movie, it's an illusion. Illusion means that. In the Buddhist use of the word illusion. There are some other, like Hindu traditions, they take illusion further, like more literally. Like all of this is just someone's imagination, or that we'll wake up one day and this is not true. And but the Buddhist context, when we say illusion, I think let's update this expression to movie. During the Buddhist time, there wasn't movies as we have it today. At best, they might have theater, right? Acting, and that's less real. But movies, oh my gosh, so real.
So we'd say the movie is kind of like just the realm of stimulus response.
Mm-hmm.
But there's an inner aspect to Buddhism which tends to get close to a certain type of religiosity, which I know is a border typically.
That's the container, The Dharma has come down to us in the religious container.
I kind of like this idea that you just brought up about the movie part and and uh, and why we enjoy movies or why we enjoy theater.
Mm-hmm.
Because we are experiencing the theater quality or the fictional quality to it, but we still are enjoying it.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, that allows us to really enjoy scary movies.
Yes.
It's just like we get
And sad movies, right? I mean, we
What?
pay and sad movies.
Yeah,
Yeah, we
yeah,
pay money for it,
yeah,
Like,
yeah. People pretending to be in love or in danger,
yes,
and we get
yes,
we enjoy it vicariously, I guess is the word.
yes.
And so, is there, you think, some kind of parallel between sort of an enlightened point of view of like understanding the theater and the display of an awakened life? I mean, from
Mm-hmm.
an awakened point of view, that our relationships with people and the pageantry and the stories and the drama and all of
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
plays out in our kind of awakened point of view as a enjoyable as well. I mean, it's just, I mean,
Yeah,
do
yeah.
you think that extends further than just being a kind of an analogy?
It can be extended further, So awakened beings will be those characters in the movie, uh, where now we're going to combine genres. It will be like the character in the Shakespearean theater that suddenly in the middle of the whole movie, right, looks right into the audience and goes, "Aha!"
Yeah,
Those will be the awakened beings, like "Acha." Then goes back,
yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's an old thing, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. And so when in that moment when we recognize that, then that's when we are receiving, so in Milarepa's language, the grace of the guru, is when the jester turns towards the audience and goes, aha,
That's
but most of us, when they go aha, we like, oh, that's part of, like, oh, that's part of,
yeah.
don't even recognize that. Or they just turn, maybe not so blatant, aha, they turn and they look into the audience and they just wink, you know. It's like the Truman Show, like there, yeah. So movies like that,
Yeah.
yeah, you can think more about like what is that play going on. So illusory is is not saying not capable of eliciting a response. In fact, the response is there. So how do we live our lives? So what would it look like if we understand more and more that this reality, right, is also movie like. It doesn't necessarily mean I now have no response to whatever unfolds. I will still have a response, but it's not the kind of response that will leave, as being expressed as, that leaves behind a trail. Meaning then, the predators can find you. And the predators are the afflictive emotions.
Snail.
Yeah, So
Snail trail.
you cry, you laugh,
Just using all this stuff.
But often that sadness and that pleasure don't really leave the theater, the movie theater. And even if when they leave, maybe they'll last to the point of the dinner that comes after. By the time you get home, it's done. What does it look like for a Buddha? That's an interesting question, I don't really know since I'm not a Buddha. What does that look like, It's something more than, maybe for Buddhas, they sit, then if we use the analogy of the movie, maybe for Buddhas, maybe movies are ruined forever. That's the price you have to pay for being a Buddha. You go to every movie and you're like, it's really stupid. Maybe, I don't know.
When you've used this analogy a lot, and one of the things that comes to my mind is, I think in the 80s, I went to see a Jurassic Park movie with my dad, and we were sitting fairly close, and I was just, jerking around as these dinosaurs were coming at me,
Uh-huh.
and my dad was so calm.
Uh-huh.
He saw models moving around on the screen.
Yeah.
He just
Right.
wasn't wrapped up in it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say, yeah, so now I'm thinking, so I have my neighbor's brother is actually one of the people that get, credit lines, in all this Disney production, you know. So I'm trying to imagine, how does Chris watch this, I think the way Chris watches, this production, he has more flexibility to turn on and off his responses, I think. And he has more insight into the technical challenges of. So I think that will be closer to what a Buddha looks at this illusion. It's not like they become incapable, which is what I fear a little bit. Because certainly I have like a lot of scary movies don't work for me. So I don't even spend the money because I would have that response like, oh, no, that's stupid. No, that's stupid. No, nothing is really going on. I don't think that is the Buddha's,
Mm-hmm.
the analogy doesn't carry over, or I hope it doesn't carry over. Uh, but I think it will be more like someone like like you were somehow involved right in the production of this movie, and the set and every scene you even know after I don't know like who are some of these names these days. I don't watch a lot of movies. Give me a name. Denzel Washington, like
Yeah.
so you're watching like some scene, right? But you're like, oh, I remember that day, like right before that he was doing this, right after that, he had diarrhea.
Oh God.
right? I mean, you kind of know, right?
Hmm.
So that would be a Buddhist experience, you know. Totally can be in the story, can understand why other people in the theater is going, you know, is he gonna make it? Is he gonna make it? And then the Buddha, who was involved in the set, was like, yeah, not only is he gonna make it in this character, but is he going to, you know, have an accident because he had diarrhea that day that he was shooting this scene, right? Yeah, it's like, oh yeah, he almost did not make it.
That's right.
So you see that whole thing, you know,
Hmm.
the illusory nature. That's the illusory nature. So there's the story of like, or the story or the teachings, anecdote of, right, what we label to be lucky and unlucky. So, right, a parent, a set of parents gave birth to a boy. Boy goes out handsome, strong, everything. Lots of happiness. The boy, very talented in, you know, riding, but then has an accident and broke his leg. A lot of sadness,
All right.
right? Then a conscription comes through because the the village, the country is in a state of war. Then everybody had to go, but not the boy because, you know, he's crippled. Then happiness. So all the joys and the happiness, you know, when we are only in this one slice of time frame, we live it as if there were no other frames, you know. But there's so many frames, right? There's so many parts to this story. I'm not denying, you know, like the sadness and the happiness that we are experiencing when we are in that frame. But to whatever degree we're able to see beyond that frame, at least some knowledge, some understanding that there are other frames, that there are other realities. And other realities as in, for everyone we come in contact with, whether fleetingly for a short moment or long moment, right? My my experience of that reality is my particular slice, my particular frame. That other individual's own slice and own frame is also very different. I have a godchild who has very severe genetic disorder. He's 3 now. He can't sit. He can't swallow. He's fed with a tube. I remember the day he was born and the joy. I remember the different slices, you know. And now, you know, on some days I feel really sad when I see him. But then I also get reminded, you know, his experience of what's going on for him, I don't really know. I'm projecting my expectations of what a 3-year-old should be experiencing. I can project better what his parents are experiencing, but at the end of the day, you know, it's still my projection. But the child himself has his own, you know, and his trajectory, we don't know. Not to be cold and not to be like, like, oh, it's just an illusion, but some perspective that they have their trajectory. That we intersect, that we have met, that we have come together, whether for 3 days, 30 days, 30 years, The question is that when that comes together, what can we do? How do we connect? That doesn't reduce the other person's trajectory to only my experience, my narrative, my sense of, but also keeps some space for the other side. That's all. This is all part of, the implications of illusory movie, Buddha vision, in contrast to our limited vision. I've mentioned this before in the past, the Chinese and Chinese culture. Sometimes people say, children are born to us either to repay kindness or to exact vengeance. I mean, it sounds like, oh, what a thing to say, But I think the more meaningful point is that we have to choose whether it's going to be an experience of repaying kindness or an experience of exacting vengeance. I think more important than is it this or that is what are we going to choose? And we can choose, any moment. For however long, for however short, we can choose. Let's choose that. Yeah? Let's choose, repaying kindness, and we keep moving. Because we will intersect again. Every person that we've met, especially someone that tugs at our heartstring one way or the other, means that we have met before and we will meet again. And so when we meet again, let us repay each other's kindness. That's an aspiration we can make. So we conclude with the bodhicitta dedication that says, the excellent and precious bodhicitta, where it has not arisen, may it arise. Where it has arisen, may it not decrease, but increase higher and higher. You all have a good rest of the afternoon.
Happy New Year.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Be careful what kind
Thank
of
you.
pittance you adopt, even if it's free. It could be a baby tiger. Will cost quite a bit to raise.
So you're heading out of town now, though?
I am heading out of town on the 14th. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Where are you going?
this time I'm going to go see my parents in Malaysia.
Ooh.
Yeah. So like many of you, for the last 2.5 years, have not seen certain people. So in this case, it's the rest of my family I've not seen for since let's see, I saw my mom November before the pandemic when I had her come to Nepal to meet me, and then I saw my dad for about a week. My mom and dad for about a week. September prior to that, when I was returning from Bhutan to the U.S. and I surprised them. Like literally, I didn't tell them. I just told my brother to pick me up at the airport, and then I turned up at the apartment that September. So that was the last time I saw my dad. And then I saw my mom again the November before the pandemic started. So plan now is to get home and see them. And then my nephew is getting married at the end of that month. And now I'm, trying to do all the things that I have to do to fly home. And it's a little bit more complicated than past years. Malaysia still has all kinds of things you have to fill in and forms you have to submit and apps you have to download and to get into the country. So yeah. So if everything goes well in terms of getting things all together and in place, next Wednesday I'll meet with the group. But if more things I have to do before I have to leave, then maybe I won't be able to do next week. When I'm in Malaysia, it's still possible to meet because we're meeting at an hour that is somewhat reasonable to the time over there. Somewhat, not totally. So we'll see. It's a 12-13 hour difference
Oh,
between here and there. Yeah. So we'll see.
all right. Well, thank you.
But the Bodhicharyavatara class that I've been doing, that's reasonable. That's more reasonable. It's like 8-9 in the morning here, which is 8-9 in the evening there. Yeah. So 11-12, it's a little bit more unclear. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you for the teaching.
Thank you.
Thank you, DrLye.
Happy
Losa.
New Year, everyone. Everyone.
Everyone. All right. No exceptions.
That's right.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.